Hi, my name is Summer, and I have a really strange story to tell. My boyfriend Andrew has always been a bit mysterious. He is super smart and a little bit introverted, so not a lot of people get him. But I felt like I did. He was always dressed in black, always sat in the same spot, and read weird books that he picked out from a library downtown. Specifically, he loved reading about conspiracy theories and unsolved mysteries. He knew so much about everything, and I found it so sexy, especially when he would explain them to me. Andrew wasn't exactly the typical boyfriend. Like, he got me weird presents, such as black roses and handmade dolls. And when we went out, he took me to places in the woods and other hidden parks he knew. We always had a lot of fun together. I loved him, I really did. But later on, things changed. Andrew started to ignore my calls and texts. He ignored me for days. At first, I was super worried. I thought something was really wrong, and he was going to break up with me. Finally, I decided to go to his house. He was just hunched over his computer and scrolling through Reddit. He told me he'd just gotten carried away online and didn't hear his phone. It was weird though, because he's never missed any of my calls or texts before, but I shrugged it off. I figured everyone has strange days. Maybe he was just tired, or accidentally put his phone on silent. Then it happened again the next day. I didn't hear from him at all, no matter how many times I called or texted him. I called his mom, and she told me he was fine. He was just shut up in his bedroom. I didn't understand why he was ignoring me all of a sudden, but I didn't want it to happen again. So on the third day, I asked him if we could hang out after school, but he told me he had something important he needed to do. I didn't understand, and we kind of argued about it. What was more important than me? So I decided to follow him, to know what was going on. I saw him walking out of school and going the opposite way than he normally would go to get home. He was walking for ages, and I started to get really creeped out. It was a weird part of town that no one ever really went to because it was so run down. All the shops were closed and the windows smashed in. Then all of a sudden, Andrew turned and walked through a gate I didn't recognize. I ran up behind him and looked through the bars. It was some old, creepy church. The sun was starting to set, and I didn't want to get caught outside in the dark, so I went home feeling confused and a little freaked out. I started to worry that maybe he'd found someone else and was meeting up with her privately where no one could see them. The idea of it was bugging me so much. I couldn't concentrate on homework. I couldn't eat. So then I did something bad. I know it's wrong, but I pulled out my laptop and I logged onto his Facebook to see if he'd been chatting to any other girls. But what I found was 10 times worse. He'd been talking to some guy with a strange and obviously fake Facebook name. Their messages were weird and sounded like gibberish, almost like a foreign language or something. The ones that were in English were weird. The other guy kept asking Andrew questions like, "Have you done what we asked?" and "Send us proof that you're serious." There weren't many messages, but it was enough to freak me out. I didn't know how to confront Andrew about it without admitting I logged into his Facebook. The next day, I walked home with him after school and confronted him about the problems we've been having. He said that he didn't mean to ignore me, but he felt he had a greater purpose at the moment. I didn't really understand what he meant. What kind of greater purpose was he talking about? That was when he told me that he'd met up with some guys from Reddit a few days ago, and he wanted to introduce me to them. At first, I wasn't sure what to think, but as Andrew started to tell me more and more about his friends, and that they'd all planned to celebrate God together, I felt a little bit better. After all, if they were good Christians, they'd be nice people for sure, wouldn't they? That also explained the creepy church. So, I agreed to go and meet up with them with Andrew. They were meeting in the same old abandoned church outside of town. It was a bit of a ruined mess, but it was kind of cool, and Andrew seemed to be so excited. I wanted it to go well for him, and I wanted him to think I was cool for coming along. But inside, it was a bit too weird for me. There were a bunch of guys all wearing dark robes. They stood around a huge red circle on the floor in the shape of a pentagram. There were candles lighting the room, and what looked like skulls. "Andrew, what is this?" I asked. "It's our weekly meeting, Summer," he replied. "I didn't expect, you said you were worshiping God," I said, feeling confused. "The devil is our god, Summer," Andrew explained. What? The devil? He must have lost his mind. "Listen, Summer, some things are not always what they seem. The devil is not bad. It's actually the opposite. The devil is liberating. Trusting the devil will give you power. In contrast, the other God who wants you to know nothing but blindly worship him. For example, God didn't let Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He didn't want them to be knowledgeable. He's not the good guy here. If you had children, you wouldn't want them to stay ignorant now, would you? He said with confidence. Andrew kept trying to explain his beliefs to me, even though I was a bit taken aback from the whole idea. I kept an open mind and listened. However, the whole thing was still crazy. I couldn't accept that my boyfriend follows a satanic religion. It was terrifying. Andrew saw how afraid I was, so he reassured me that there was nothing to fear. He then offered to take me to another meeting to decide for myself. I hesitated a bit, but then I agreed. I went to the meeting the next day, and to be honest, it wasn't bad, and I had many questions. I started going to those meetings with Andrew more often. In the prayer meetings, they wore these black robes, and Andrew made me wear one too. They would chant things and light candles. It was always in Latin. Andrew asked me to say the words too, so I did, even though I had no idea what they meant. I honestly still had some suspicions, but I kept telling myself that these people weren't harmful, and since Andrew was enjoying the meetings, I should too. After a while, I found myself enjoying these meetings. I got excited to go to every meeting, and I was always with Andrew. I also liked the people there. The community was really nice to me, and I made a lot of friends. Then came the day I was privileged to become a member of Andrew's community, and I got invited to attend a welcoming ceremony. When I accepted the invite, Andrew gave me the biggest hug and whispered in my ear that he loved me. I loved him too, and I was glad that I'm making the one I love happy. Later on, I was taken to the temple where I was going to become a member. However, I was surprised to see that there was a live chicken in the room. The other members told me that this was the ritual of accepting a new member into the community. They had to sacrifice a living being. I laughed, thinking they were joking, but none of the others laughed. Then Andrew pulled out a knife, and I gasped. The fluffy, clucking chicken was innocent. There was no need to kill it. You can't do this, it's wrong, I cried. Andrew said it was okay, and that I should just calm down, but I didn't. Instead, I reached my hands to the chicken and untied the rope wrapped around its legs. The poor chicken was terrified, and it quickly ran away. Andrew looked so angry. I never saw him so mad in the whole time I knew him. He rushed over to me and grabbed me by the hair. "Stop being stupid, Summer. This is important. We need to sacrifice to Satan to make him happy and bring in a new member. In return, he'll make us stronger, more powerful, and he'll give us riches. You don't understand anything. You're just a silly schoolgirl," he said. "You're mad!" I screamed, and he yanked my hair harder until I was crying in pain. He lifted the knife in his hand, and I couldn't breathe. Everything in my body was telling me to run. I kicked him in the leg and sent him flying to the floor before I ran away and never looked back. When I got home, I ran in my mother's arms and burst into tears. My parents were pretty worried, but I couldn't bear to tell them everything that happened. All I said was that Andrew and I were broken up, and I wasn't going to see him ever again. I cried all night. The next day, I was so nervous about going to school and seeing him. Luckily, he wasn't there. I wondered about whether I was the reason he didn't show up, but the reason wasn't important. What mattered was that I won't see him that day. Surprisingly, the teacher told us that Andrew won't be coming back to our school, like ever. Apparently, his mom called in that morning to say that they had to move out of the city for urgent business reasons. I couldn't feel luckier and happier than that. Now, when I look back on it all, I feel like I'd been so stupid. I mean, oh my God, I'd put on stupid robes and chanted silly words that made no sense. I'd done it all to make Andrew happy, despite what my head was telling me to do. I guess it proves that love can make you do stupid things sometimes, but it's important to understand that you shouldn't let anyone manipulate you, especially not when you're vulnerable.
Hello, I'm Stacy. Have you ever experienced something crazy while traveling abroad? Well, I certainly have. It's not what you'd expect, though, because I'm not talking about a wild adventure. Actually, it was an experience that almost ended my life and everyone who was on the plane with me. Sounds a bit mental, right? Well, wait until you hear what really happened. It all started when I was on my way back from India. My two best friends and I had gone to join in the celebrations for Holi, the Festival of Colors. That's the one where everyone throws brightly colored powder around. It was so amazing. all the colors lighting up the air around us, making us look like a rainbow. We had a lot of fun, even though it took us about a day to wash the colors out of our hair. Anyway, my friends and I were going home after a 2-week stay, and it was about time for our flight back. None of us had been on a plane before this trip, so even though it was our second flight, it was still a pretty new and exciting thing to do. If only we had known what was about to follow. After about 3 hours in the air, a conversation behind us got my attention. It was a man complaining that he felt sick. His wife was asking if he felt queasy from the plane, and he was saying it wasn't that. He just felt cold and shivery. I heard her say to him that he had a fever. Well, that probably doesn't seem like a big deal, but pretty soon we realized that was just the beginning of something very strange. After the first person got sick, someone across the aisle from them leaned over and said they were feeling sick too. They compared the symptoms and they both felt the same thing. My friends and I weren't really bothered at first, but when we heard another passenger asking the flight attendant if they had anything to help with the fever, we started freaking out. It was getting seriously weird. 3 people on one flight suddenly getting sick wasn't normal. As the flight went on, it seemed like every half hour someone new was complaining that they were sick, developing a fever really fast, shaking, cold sweats, coughing, and headaches. It was one person after the next. Every few minutes, someone would call a flight attendant who was trying not to look nervous. One asked for aspirin. Another asked for a cool cloth for his wife's forehead. Another asked if they had any blankets because she had no warm clothes for her son. Then another, then another, then another. My friends and I were not the only ones who were freaking out. It was the whole plane. And we still had to endure 7 more hours of this. I tried to count how many people were complaining of sickness. It was up to 30. The whole plane seemed to be full of a crowd of people with a mysterious illness. To lighten the mood, my one friend suggested we should play a betting game. Guess who is going to get sick next? The winner would get a chocolate bar when we landed, she said. Of course, we didn't actually play it. It was just a way to try and calm us down. But anyway, it didn't take long to find out who I should have betted on. I soon started feeling cold and shaky. My head felt all fuzzy. My friend checked and told me I had a fever. Suddenly, I was terrified. Maybe it was a bit dramatic of me, but I really thought I was going to die. I was starting to feel so bad that even my own friends were keeping their distance from me. And no wonder. It was spreading faster than any illness I'd ever heard of. I was terrified. 20 minutes before the flight landed, people started to relax a bit. I guess that they couldn't wait to get off this diseased plane. However, when the plane landed, things got even more chaotic because the doors wouldn't open. The plane had received an order to lock everyone in. Finally, there was an announcement. We were being quarantined. Nobody was allowed off the plane before things were handled. We were told to stay put and wait for medical professionals, and that nobody must attempt to leave when the doors opened, or we risked spreading the unknown foreign virus to everyone outside. That made me even more scared. Quarantine was the kind of thing that only happened in movies. If they weren't letting us off this plane to protect everyone outside, I figured they must have thought there was a chance we could all die. So I wasn't being too dramatic after all. We waited, and finally, some doctors from the Center for Disease Control stepped onto the plane. One by one, they checked every passenger, even the ones who weren't sick. With the sick ones, they checked their temperature, their blood pressure, asked them where they had been, and interviewed them about their symptoms. I listened closely. Everyone was describing the same thing. Every now and then, the doctors would step into the cockpit for a few minutes before coming back out. I figured they were probably discussing their findings, but they kept repeating this, checking everyone in exactly the same way. It felt like this went on for an eternity, while I waited to find out just how serious my condition was. My friends were trying to stay calm to make me feel better, but I could tell they were nervous. They were worried about me. Finally, the doctor started letting people go. I was surprised to see almost everyone leaving the plane, one by one. My friends were happy, telling me it couldn't be so serious if they were letting people off.